What does it mean to be broken? What about this yellow bear gives it supernatural abilities greater than any other character we've seen in the FNAF franchise? And what does it have to do with this crying child? Today, I'm going to answer every one of these questions. In doing so, not only will we discover the truth to Golden Freddy, but we're finally going to put this broken timeline back together. Back in 2015, following the middling reception of the third FNAF game, Scott Cawthon decided to come back one last time, and wrap up the story in a big, neat bow with Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the final chapter. At this point in time, it seemed like we had a pretty tight understanding of the first three games, a purple phone guy and a few extra spirits notwithstanding, but suddenly we had a lot of new, erroneous details to figure out. There was a new dead kid, rumors of murders before Freddy's even opens, and an event that sure seems like the bite of 87 given all those hints in the website teasers, but just can't be due to a handful of very crucial contradictions. It didn't take long for people to figure out that this game actually takes place in 1983 during the Fredbear's Family Diner era, but that only raises more questions. Why are there all these weird details from later in the timeline? Who is this kid dressed like the puppet but killed by Fredbear? Why is this plushie speaking to him? And why does it seem like this is Happiest Day all over again? And Scott was actually surprised that we didn't figure it out. I've come to realize that all of these unanswered questions are ultimately the result of us not understanding how Golden Freddy works. To figure that out, we have to first look backwards to the last time Scott ever directly tried to help the community solve these games. During a game theory livestream dedicated to solving FNAF 4, Scott began updating his website in real time to provide the community with 3 hints. These 3 very short, simple sentences would forever haunt FNAF discourse. You know these 3 hints, but you probably aren't as familiar with the context in which they were sent. So I looked back at the moments leading up to each teaser and used that to analyze not only what Scott was saying, but why he was saying it. In the lead up to the first hint, MatPat and guest Alex were discussing the 1987 teaser codes and all of the seemingly random Easter eggs throughout the game.
Scott, since we know you're listening, it's also really hard to tell what is and isn't an Easter egg or clue, right?
That 87 business, it's like it was a red herring, I think.
Food for thought on this live stream or a future live stream. During the minigames in FNAF 4, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak?
It's obvious that Scott wanted to clear something up about these 87 teasers. They're not red herrings as suggested here by Alex. If they were, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? It's clearly evoking the actual toy Chica from FNAF 2. The next teaser came pretty soon after the first, meaning that Scott most likely wanted the two to be considered alongside one another.
He said, what is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Silence.
From here, MatPat starts to develop a hypothesis.
This is weird, okay?
Yeah.
But it's one of the things that immediately jumps to my mind. Is it possible that FNAF 2 didn't actually happen?
To which Scott very quickly replies,
Yeah, he said 4 games, 1 story. That's what he said on the website. 4 games, 1 story.
This final hint, in context, makes a lot more sense. It seems like Scott may have been trying to dispel the notion that FNAF 2 was a dream. However, MatPat actually took this as a hint that he wasn't going far enough and led him to create his infamous Dream Theory video. That theory essentially proposes that Scott was retconning all 3 prior games to be fictitious hallucinations dreamt up in the dying mind of the crying child. Now, this theory has a lot of problems, but it fit neatly enough as an explanation that a lot of people still believe it was Scott's original intention with FNAF 4. However, today I'm here to tell you that MatPat was actually kind of right. But only kind of. Stick with me here. See, MatPat got all the right pieces of evidence, arranged them all in the right way, but just didn't quite stick the landing with his conclusion. But hey, listen, I don't blame him. When I came to the conclusion I'm about to explain, I wasn't so sure either. But if you give me a chance, you'll see that this is almost certainly what Scott was trying to tell us with FNAF 4. The tiny toy Chica missing her beak is a clever detail for Scott to highlight because it brings to mind the other out-of-place connections to the rest of the franchise littered throughout this game. Now, the most obvious and important thing to note about these connections is that most of them line up suspiciously well with the Happiest Day minigames in FNAF 3. BB's air adventure connects to this kid on the street holding a balloon. Mangle's quest links to the broken toy in the sister's room. Chica's party is clearly called on by the tiny toy Chica missing its beak. An RWQ's minigame would be referenced by these shadows cast by Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, not to mention Stage 01 clearly taking place in Fredbear's family diner. Now, I'm far from the first person to point these connections out, but it's important to note that Scott is connecting the crying child's memories of this week to the resolution of Happiest Day, which ends at a birthday party with 4 guests wearing animatronic masks. The final child, the birthday boy, receives a Fredbear mask once all the spirits are gathered there. So that's a pretty clean answer, right? Why is this stuff in FNAF 4? Well, it's to link it to the Golden Freddy kid in FNAF 3. Case closed. Except, obviously not, case back open, because the issue isn't why these things are here, it's how. Almost all of these examples are in some way out of place chronologically, given that this game takes place years before a lot of it should be able to exist. And those connections to Happiest Day aren't the only weird Easter eggs in the game. Other future nods include this kid calling their Spring Bonnie toy a finger trap, which is an obvious nod to the purple guy's fate. Willie A himself is seen here rocking the same fit as we see in FNAF 2's Save Them. This Susie lookalike with the tiny toys is striking a withered Chica scarecrow pose, and this Foxy plush is as close to the teddy bear equivalent of out of order as you can get. And even still, there are more connections to future events, 2 in particular which we should analyze more closely. The first is what we hear from the pigtail girl outside Fredbear's 2 days before the crying child is bitten.
You better watch out. I hear they come to life at night, and if you die, they hide your body and never tell anyone.
The first most literal interpretation of this dialogue would imply that the missing children's incident has already occurred, and that Fredbear's and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza are open simultaneously. However, this directly contradicts what we've been told about Fredbear's, that being it was a predecessor to Freddy's. In FNAF 3, Phone Guy refers to the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie animatronics as the classic suits, at the Freddy's where the MCI occurs, meaning that by the time of the missing children's incident, Fredbear's is long gone, and its star performers have been taken out of the spotlight and put into the new restaurant as side acts.
But then what about all this Freddy's merchandise in FNAF 4? Checkmate.
Well, as seen on the TV later that same day, the Freddy's gang are actually cartoon characters who act as the supporting cast for Fredbear. In the security logbook on a page dedicated to rebrandings which occur whenever PR disaster strikes, Mike draws the bloody mouth Fredbear as the mascot for the rebranded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. On another page, which deals with exactly the same kind of PR complaints, Mike writes, "He tripped and fell on Freddy's teeth. Not our fault." All this is to say that the Freddy's brand is almost certainly the result of having to reorganize Fredbear's after the big bite. Fazbear Entertainment quickly pulls those canned prototypes based off their popular cartoon mascots and makes them the non-reputation destroyed stars of the show. Most likely, these playground rumors of animatronics coming to life at night are actually just, well, playground rumors. Scary stories dreamt up by the kids to spook one another. With that being said, much like the Mangle and the toy Chica missing her beak, this seems odd to be coincidentally true in the future, but baseless here in the past. And if you thought that was on the nose, we still have yet to mention the most glaring future forward reference in the entire game.
Was that the bite of 87?
I'm sorry, I just couldn't get through a FNAF 4 video without referencing this clip. In fairness, Mark's reaction here is understandable. To the average viewer, this is most certainly a good contender for the infamous bite we heard about back in FNAF 1, and Scott definitely knew that we'd think this. As already discussed, Scott even teed up the 87 connections throughout the marketing, but like I said, I don't think that was just to mess with people. Scott likes to be cryptic, and sure, he has some rug-pulling reveals in his games, like FNAF 2 not being a sequel, or Springtrap turning out to be the purple guy, but this? I mean, sure, it's a twist if you look really deep into the minigames and find this one TV with 1983 on it, but what? The twist is there's actually 2 bites? Okay. It'd be a strange choice to include all this stuff just to turn around and say, gotcha, none of that meant anything. But again, as we've concluded, these weren't just random red herrings. So what does it all mean? And if it's not dream theory, how could I suggest that Map Pack was still kinda correct? Well, he took all this time traveling imagery to mean that these future events couldn't have actually occurred, and that this game was the only one which takes place in reality. But what if I told you that those future events did occur precisely because of what we see in FNAF 4, or more accurately, because of what the crying child sees. Due to the unique circumstances surrounding his death, this boy's memories begin to affect reality itself. This theory will not only explain FNAF 4, but shows that when Scott wrote this game, he was playing 4D chess, simultaneously giving us the origins to the franchise and solving some of the biggest questions we had about the lore in one big bite. This might seem like a big pill to swallow, especially with such a grandiose T-Dreadsian title, but follow me and understand that there is a lot of textual evidence for this theory, not only in the games themselves, but scattered all throughout this multimedia franchise. So, to be clear, I'm suggesting that the real animatronic toy Chica in the year 1987 removes her beak because CC saw this broken toy with the same malfunction. The Funtime Foxy animatronic is torn apart by kids that same year because CC saw a disassembled Foxy toy years earlier in his sister's room. Springtrap, Balloon Boy, the Shadows, everything MatBat used as dream theory evidence, we flip to become a future event influenced by the memory of the past. And again, the same two future connections which we highlighted before prove particularly interesting when viewed through this lens. This time though, let's discuss the Bite of 87 first. Given some clues we've received over the last few years, we have a fair understanding that Withered Foxy, or potentially Mangle, was actually the one to commit this second bite. However, I think Scott already gave us this answer in 2015. Under GodVictim, the Bite of 87 would have been caused by the crying child's memory of his own injury, but the perpetrator would have been Foxy because, in his mind, that's who was actually at fault. Michael wearing the Foxy mask eventually gets warped by broken memories into Foxy causing the next bite in 1987. In the FNAF 4 teasers, there's even this image of Nightmare Foxy with the numbers 8 and 7 reflected in his eyes, showing us that this character witnessed the event firsthand. Furthermore, we have the 1987 Easter egg in FNAF 1, where inputting that year into the custom night gets you jump scared by Golden Freddy, indicating his ghostly relationship with this event. The connections between the Bite, Foxy, and Fredbears are actually further cemented in external media, specifically the week before. Now, admittedly, the books are dubiously canon, even the interactive novels, but I think the connections here are interesting nonetheless. On night 4 in Pirates Cove, you can receive a Fredbear's Family Diner ticket, stained with blood, but we have to wonder why this would be here, maybe to draw our attention to the link between Foxy and the Big Bite. I mean, in FNAF 3, the Foxy's Kid spirit is even directly linked to the Fredbear Stage 01 minigame. Now, for that other thing I think the crying child influenced. This will almost be certainly controversial, but allow me to lay it out as plainly and simply as I can. 3 days before he's bitten, the crying child is prompted by the Fredbear plush to remember what he saw. Only moments later, we can see the purple guy in his one and only appearance in this game, lurking in a back room. In reality, William here is just helping an employee into their costume, but let's not forget that second, very important hint that Scott gave us on the GT livestream. What is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Given that there have been playground rumors going around of people going missing and animatronics coming to life at night, I think that CC misunderstood what was happening in that back room. What I'm suggesting is that William Afton was inspired to start stuffing kids in suits because CC thought that's what he saw his father doing in the back room. Don't get me wrong, I don't think William was just a totally nice guy who CC worked into becoming a murderer, but I think his method of disposal was almost certainly brought on by CC's memory. But the real question is why and how can CC do this? Well, I think it all has to do with how he died. For a long time now, I and many others have believed that the crying child's death, though preceded by a bite, is unique when compared to the Bite of 87. That event resulted in the victim losing their frontal lobe, but the same can't coincidentally be true for another separate event. Clearly, CC had his head crushed and... Scott Coughlin said on Reddit that CC did lose his frontal lobe, and nobody took note because it was a reply to a joke post. Got it. Here we have confirmation from Scott that Cece did in fact suffer the same fate as Jeremy in the Bite of 87. Now, I don't blame you if you're still not convinced. Maybe Scott was just goofing around and didn't think too hard about his reply. I thought exactly the same thing when I read it for the first time as well. But then, out of morbid curiosity, I went looking to see if anything could be learned about Golden Freddy if Cece did in fact lose his frontal lobe. And I was shocked. In my research, I found several medical journals which listed the following as common complications for patients who have sustained damage to their frontal lobe: minimal to substantial memory loss, difficulty organizing information temporally, mood swings, changes in social behavior and personality, loss of acute motor function, sometimes resulting in paralysis, difficulties with impulse control, and speech and language production. I wonder if we have any paralyzed character who acts erratically, suffers from memory problems, and only speaks in short, simple sentences. Look, I know this might seem like I've cherry-picked some symptoms that fit my conclusion, but look it up for yourself. There is so much research done about this, and there is a staggering number of sources which cite many, if not all of these, as results of frontal lobe damage. What I'm saying is that if I could find this stuff, you can be sure that Scott Cawthon would have been able to when writing FNAF 4. If you want more in-game evidence, we can look to FNAF World, a game explicitly said to act as the method by which the crying child is put back together. If we look at the map for FNAF World, it sort of looks like a human brain. Some people disagree that it's a brain at all, which, fair enough, it's pretty abstract, but humor me for a second. If we take a look at this dead zone in the top left, dusting fields, I think, given its position on this brain, it could potentially represent the crying child's broken mind, missing or at least having sustained damage to its frontal lobe. There's a sense that this part of the map may not have always been desolate. An old, run-down Ferris wheel looms over the entire area, and the shadow of a bear wearing a top hat dances on a tree stump long after his show has ended. This area in the modern FNAF landscape evokes strong notes of Fall Fest and Fredbear's Singin' Show. Even if these concepts were barely a twinkle in old Scott Cawthon's eye when he made FNAF World, the idea that this place once held importance and has since frozen over is interesting when comparing it to the crying child's condition. So, okay, Cece loses his frontal lobe and is hospitalized, surviving the event the same way that Jeremy did after the Bite of 87. But when he eventually does die, his broken mind becomes one with the field. Some of you probably don't know what that means, or you've heard the field memes and know it's tangentially related to Fazbear Frights, but don't really get the ins and outs. Now, I could try and explain the field to you, but I am far from the best read FNAF theorist when it comes to the books. Luckily, I know somebody who just made a 36-hour video discussing Fazbear Frights, and is probably the most knowledgeable member of the community when it comes to understanding how these books relate to external media. To explain the field and how it ties into GodVictim, here is your FNAF world building and media literacy professor, Gibi from the Horror Homestead.
Hi, I'm Gibi. FNAF has a magic system, and no, I don't mean magic wands and mana. A magic system is the term used for the way any supernatural force works in a piece of media. In FNAF, there are explicit but undefined supernatural events, like posters changing on walls, Golden Freddy appearing and disappearing before your eyes, words flashing in front of your vision. In the FNAF universe, these supernatural occurrences can be quantified through a substance called Remnant. Remnant is first used by name in the games in FNAF 6, where it's explained that Remnant is what leads to the creation of ulterior presence, or ghosts. The games do little to explain this further, but it is explained in the novels. In non-scientific terms, it's like the metal is haunted. It's more complicated than that, of course, but it's similar to the way that water conducts electricity. Remnant is the mixing of the tangible with the intangible, of memory with the present. The people and things that are lost, it makes them almost real again. Two things in the series have been shown to create Remnant: agony and love. Areas and objects permeated with lots of memory increase the effectiveness of the magic. While Scott could have stopped there with his explanation of FNAF magic, he goes one step further by actually explaining how this memory magic works. In the Fazbear Fright story Fetch, the main character, Greg, is interested in the 0-point field and attempts to gain control of its limitless power. The entire story focuses on the field, as does the story of the villainous Dr. Phineas Taggart in the Stitch Wraith epilogues. The thing is, the 0 point field is very real. Everything in the universe is made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of smaller components that we call quantum particles. The empty space between particles should have nothing in it, no energy, and yet, at temperatures of absolute zero, where energy should not be present, our tools still pick up energy readings. We call this the 0 point field. Everything I just said is real science, but what we're going to talk about now is not scientific, it's just plain fantasy. Quantum magic is the idea that by harnessing or controlling the 0 point field, you can manipulate reality in any way you see fit. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's what the Force in Star Wars is.
It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
These concepts are written about in the book The Field by author Lynn McTaggart, which is almost certainly where Phineas Taggart gets his name from. She describes plenty of real-world experiments that seemingly prove the existence of quantum magic and the use of the 0 point field. She believes that our thoughts determine our reality, and thus you can manipulate the field by thinking really hard. Something Lynn discusses, which is based in the current scientific understanding of the human brain, is that memories are not stored in the brain like grooves on a record. Memories are stored all throughout the brain. Taking out a chunk of your frontal cortex does not remove your 9th birthday party. You just might have difficulty accessing that memory, but the memory itself isn't deleted. Quantum mysticism views the entire universe in a similar way. They believe the quality of everything exists everywhere. It's like a memory made present, which is the exact definition of remnant from Fazbear Frights. Lynn also argues that children have greater access to the field than adults. It's also said to be easier to access the field when in a state of unconsciousness, and this is because the ability to control the field is easiest when a sense of self is diminished and you're able to accept that you're one with the entire universe. The problem is, in states where the sense of self is diminished, like being asleep, your ability to use your intention to shape reality is also diminished. But there is one circumstance in which that's not the case. Investigators attempted to replicate the work of the Princeton Pear Lab using random event generators, but with one important twist. They had enlisted several patients with frontal lobe damage. The only person to have a greater than normal effect was a volunteer who had a damaged left frontal lobe. The volunteer's particular handicap could have given him a reduced sense of self, but a normal state of attention. So, in Lynn McTaggart's book, whom Scott names a main character after, it is directly stated that someone with frontal lobe damage has a greater effect on the 0 point field, children have a greater effect on the 0 point field, being asleep or in a coma gives you a greater effect on the 0 point field, and the 0 point field can ripple your thoughts into the universe to change reality to reflect your thoughts, and especially control machines. Remember, the field is just straight up canon in the Fazbear Frights continuity. And in that series, we are also told that agony collects around places and objects, which in turn increase the efficacy of Freddy Fazbear magic. Back to the Unwithered Truth to see where he could possibly be going with all of this.
Thanks, Gibi. Who knew Scott Cawthon imported his magic system from a pseudoscience self-help book from the 2000s? I'm kidding, the field is peak sci-fi fantasy. I would have done the same thing. Anyway, given what we now know about the field and agony, who might just fit the description of a child who lost their frontal lobe and endures torture day in and day out? Empowered by agony and driven by an inability to organize and ground his memories, the crying child's spirit accidentally begins to warp the world around him. Events from his past reoccur, and his childish misunderstandings of innocent things begin to take twisted shape in reality. Scott didn't give us a half-baked it was all a dream plot. He crafted an origin story for not only FNAF's most powerful entity, but the entirety of the game's key events up to that point. And what was that final Scott Games hint? 4 games, 1 story. Except I don't even think it ends there. As Gibi pointed out, the magic system of FNAF also makes it clear that places and objects imbued with agony can also affect the field, meaning that we might be dealing with more than just a god victim. We're dealing with the haunted grounds of Fredbear's itself.
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name
Have you ever wondered why Fazbear wants to contact the owner of a restaurant from 2 locations ago? I certainly have, as have many other theorists over the years, but for a long time we just assumed it was Scott trying to lay the groundwork for sequels and prequels by dropping a lore-relevant name. However, if we consider the words original restaurant owner, could Scott have been trying to tell us that the FNAF 2 pizzeria was actually the revamped Fredbear's Family Diner? At the start of FNAF 2, the newspaper says that this is a vintage pizzeria given new life. Freddy's has only been around for 4 years at this point. It would be a real stretch to label it vintage. Fredbear's, however, seems to have been around since at least the early 70s, potentially even earlier than that, so I think the vintage description would certainly fit. We also have lines from the logbook which ask if the Crying Child's favourite ride was the carousel, a feature only shown in the FNAF 2 location up to that point. It even features the classic characters who should be obsolete by the opening of the 87 location, but seem to be heavily promoted at Fredbear's. If the FNAF 2 location is Fredbear's, it would finally make sense why the majority of these connections would tie into FNAF 2 specifically. This plot of land is where the Crying Child endured the worst days of his life, leading directly to the event which is repeated 4 years later. So, is this any better than Dream Theory? Am I suggesting that under GodVictim, all agency is removed from the story? Well, no. See, GodVictim may account for some of the finer details of the story, individual events or quirks of the series which Scott can paint with a more intentional brush, but that doesn't mean we lose our characters' agency. In Fazbear Frights, the characters are perhaps pushed in certain directions by the field's influence, but they can still act of their own accord 90% of the time. GodVictim, in my opinion, is probably the cleanest explanation for FNAF 4 that we have, given that it ties not only into all the hints and Easter eggs in that game, but also lines up very nicely with what we know about the field and Agony from later entries in the franchise. If you're not a fan, fair enough, but I'd ask you to try re-examining the series from this angle and see if there might be any big, glaring things that I could have missed, anything I might not have mentioned. Oh. The reason I've avoided discussing this character in this video is because T-Dreads and I came up with a very interesting and kind of out there take on who exactly Cassidy might be. However, I don't want to pack this video with too many out there takes because I want GodVictim to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. For that reason, I'm going to make my Cassidy video and release it soon as a follow-up to this one. As a sort of disclaimer to put at the end of this video, while all the conclusions you heard in this video were reached independently by myself with the help of theorists like T-Dreads and Gibi Horror Homestead, another very similar theory, known as Memory Victim, predates this video by quite a bit. While the Reddit account which created the post has since been deleted, I want everyone to know that this post exists. When we originally started coming up with this theory, we were just not aware of Memory Victim whatsoever, and so the name GodVictim took a life of its own, and now that's just what we call it. There's also this video by Cyrusquawks which was uploaded while I was making this video. It's really cool and discusses a lot of similar evidence to this video, but he reaches slightly different conclusions, which is great because it's important that we get as many eyes and minds on this stuff as possible. It seems that as a community we are finally ready to look at FNAF 4 in a new way, which might just get us closer to solving some of the greatest mysteries in the franchise. Anyway, make sure you're subscribed to my channel, and if you want to support what I do, consider joining as a member. If you don't, then it means I've failed at manipulating the field.